"You've got to be kidding me, Doctor," Nylia Curran muttered, her voice barely louder than the hum of the neon lights that bathed Synapse in a perpetual pink glow. She squinted at the digital display in front of her, a cluster of holographic text hovering by her elbow. The words "Peace Treaty with Jaren ratified" burned in electric blue, as if the universe was playing a particularly poor joke. "Nope, not kidding," replied Jax, her assistant, who was lounging in the corner with the kind of grace only acquired through years of not giving a damn. He adjusted his position in the chair, tipping back precariously. "It's real. Apparently, shaking hands is all it takes to erase a century of bad blood. Who knew?" Nylia snorted. "Yeah, because nothing says trustworthy like six-legged lizards with a penchant for eating their enemies' eyeballs as a delicacy." She tapped the hologram, dismissing the news article to reveal a complex grid of data points and heat maps. "Something's off." "Like what?" Jax asked, not entirely interested. He was more focused on the untouched pack of synth cigarettes in his pocket than whatever conspiracy Nylia was brewing today. "The timing, for one." Nylia leaned in closer to the display, her eyes narrowing. "The Jaren don't just decide to make nice. Not after the slaughter at Proxima B. They're planning something." Jax shrugged, reaching for his cigarettes. "Maybe they got tired of licking their wounds, or maybe they just ran out of eyeballs." "Funny," Nylia said dryly, "but I've seen this before." "They're up to something." She straightened, turning to face Jax fully. "And I'll bet my doctorate it's not a knitting circle." Jax lit a cigarette and took a long drag, the smoke swirling up to merge with the endless haze that filled every corner of Synapse. "So, what's the plan? Call up the Galactic Council and tell them they are idiots." "Tempting," Nylia replied, smirking slightly. "But I doubt they'd appreciate the insight." "No, I'm going to dig." "Ah, digging," Jax mused. "Always a good way to get buried." "I prefer to think of it as investigating," Nylia corrected. "There's something in the data, I'm sure of it." Jax watched her work, the clatter of her fingers on the console keys filling the air. "Ever thought about a holiday, somewhere nice? Somewhere that doesn't involve getting vaporized by space lizards?" Nylia chuckled without humor. "As if the Jaren would let us enjoy a vacation without a little laser tag." She paused, staring at a particular entry in the data. "Look at this." Jax reluctantly leaned forward, peering at the glowing display. "Looks like numbers to me." "Exactly," Nylia said, her tone insistent. "These aren't just any numbers. They are fleet movements, and they're headed straight for the outer colonies." Her finger traced the line of numbers, each digit a harbinger of doom. "If this treaty's so damn peaceful, why are they mobilizing?" Jax exhaled slowly, a plume of smoke escaping his lips like the ghost of a bad decision. "So we're not getting peace. Not unless peace comes with a side of plasma blasts." Nylia stood, pacing the cramped room. "I'm gonna need to talk to someone who's not as blind as our esteemed leaders. Someone who remembers what it's like to be on the wrong end of a Jaren warship." "You mean someone with a death wish," Jax quipped, flicking ash onto the floor. "I'm counting on it." Nylia grabbed her coat, a threadbare relic from her days before Synapse, and headed toward the door. "Keep an eye on the data. If anything changes, let me know." "Sure thing, boss," Jax replied, watching her go with a mix of admiration and concern. "Try not to get disintegrated. It's hard to find good help these days." Nylia shot him a grin before disappearing into the bustling neon chaos of Synapse. The city was alive with the hum of machinery and the chatter of its inhabitants, a cacophony that was both comforting and maddening. She moved through the streets with purpose, her mind racing with possibilities. The Jaren had pulled off the impossible, convincing the bureaucratic snails of the Galactic Council to sign a treaty. It smelled worse than a spaceport restroom on a Friday night. She needed answers, and fast. Her destination was the Fringe, a seedy underbelly of Synapse where the unwanted and the unscrupulous found common cause. It was also where one could find Rico, a former military strategist turned black market information broker. If anyone had the dirt on the Jaren, it was him. The Fringe was as welcoming as ever, which is to say not at all. The buildings leaned close, as if conspiring against the sky. The air was thick with the stench of desperation and unwashed bodies, a potent cocktail that would make any rational being reconsider their life choices. Nylia pushed through the throng, ignoring the catcalls and half-hearted sales pitches from vendors hawking everything from questionable weapons to even more questionable food. She stopped outside a nondescript door, its surface scarred by years of neglect and the occasional riot. She knocked, a coded rhythm that announced her as someone who wouldn't be easily deterred. The door creaked open, revealing Rico's grizzled face. "Nylia," he greeted, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Didn't think I'd see you down here again." "Desperate times," she replied, slipping inside. "And you're the only bastard I know who likes a challenge." Rico chuckled, a sound that was more cough than laughter. "Flattery will get you everywhere. What do you need?" "Information," she said, cutting straight to the chase. "On the Jaren," Rico scratched his chin, considering. "That'll cost you." "It always does," Nylia said, resigning herself to the inevitable gouging. "But this is big." "Bigger than your last big?" Rico asked, his expression skeptical. "Much bigger," she assured him, her tone leaving no room for doubt. He nodded slowly, retreating deeper into his lair of screens and wires. "All right, give me a moment." He began tapping at a keyboard that looked like it had been salvaged from the ruins of a forgotten war. Nylia waited, her impatience mounting like a bad smell. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the flickering monitors that cast ghostly shadows across Rico's face. "Here," he said finally, spinning the monitor toward her. "This is what I've got." Nylia leaned in, absorbing the data. Fleet movements, troop deployments, all the things that should not be happening under a peace treaty. "They're preparing for something," she muttered. "Looks that way," Rico confirmed. "And it's not a surprise party." "No," Nylia agreed. "It's a massacre waiting to happen." Rico leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on her. "So what are you going to do about it?" "Stop it," she said simply. "Before it's too late." "You always did have a thing for the impossible," he remarked, shaking his head. "Comes with the job," Nylia replied. "Speaking of which, don't suppose you'd like to help save the universe again?" Rico snorted. "Not unless there's a hefty bonus involved." "I'll see what I can do," she promised, knowing full well she'd be lucky to walk away with her own skin intact. "Thanks, Rico." She turned to leave, her mind already racing with plans and contingencies. But before she could reach the door, Rico called after her. "Nylia," he said, his tone surprisingly serious. "Be careful." She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Careful's not really my style." "No," he agreed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "But you might want to give it a try." With that sage piece of advice echoing in her mind, Nylia stepped out into the night, the city's relentless energy pulsing around her like a living thing. The Jaren were up to something, and she had a feeling it was going to get a whole lot worse before it got better, and she wouldn't have it any other way. Nylia navigated the bustling chaos of Synapse with the ease of someone who knew the best way to avoid getting pickpocketed in broad daylight was to look like you might bite back. It was a skill she'd honed over years of dealing with bureaucrats and the occasional alien warlord. Her destination was the lower levels, where the city's unofficial subculture of tech wizards and digital pirates thrived. This was where Riven Farr held court, a coder so eccentric he made mad scientists look like quaint history teachers. She'd worked with Riven before, during that whole debacle with the rogue AI that tried to turn the Galactic Council into its personal chess set. Good times. The entrance to Riven's lair was hidden behind a facade of dilapidated storefronts selling authentic Earth relics, which was code for overpriced junk. Nylia knocked on the door, the sequence a mix of rhythm and random number patterns that only someone with Riven's peculiar genius could appreciate. The door slid open with a weary groan, revealing a dimly lit corridor that smelled faintly of burnt circuits and stale pizza. She stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a finality that suggested escape was not a priority in Riven's world. Riven himself was a sight, hunched over a console, muttering to himself in a cocktail of programming languages that sounded like a bad case of digital Tourette's. His hair was a wild tangle of curls that seemed to defy gravity, and his glasses perched precariously on the edge of his nose like they'd given up on life. "Nylia," he exclaimed, not looking up from his screen. "To what do I owe this unexpected intrusion into my hermit-like existence?" "Riven," Nylia replied, moving closer. "I need your help." Ah, the damsel in distress routine, always a classic. "Should I be preparing to fight a dragon, or is it just more of your usual nonsense?" "Unfortunately, it's the kind of nonsense that comes with scales and a taste for human eyeballs," she said, pulling up a stool. "The Jaren." Riven's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Intriguing. And here I thought the biggest threat today was running out of caffeine." Nylia smirked. "I'm sure this will provide all the adrenaline you need. I've got data, encrypted layers on the peace treaty. Something's off. I need you to take a look." With a grand gesture that sent empty cans clattering across the floor, Riven cleared a space for her data chip. "Lay it on me. Let's see what kind of secrets these scaly bastards are hiding." She handed over the chip, watching as he slotted it into his setup. The screens around him flickered to life, bathing the room in an eerie blue light. The air hummed with the familiar sound of data being dissected and reassembled, a symphony of clicks and whirs. "So, what do we know about our reptilian friends' intentions, apart from their obvious culinary preferences?" Riven asked, eyes darting across the screens. "They're moving fleets towards the outer colonies," Nylia replied. "That's not exactly the behavior of a peace-loving species. I need to know what they are planning." Riven worked in silence for a while, the only sound the rapid-fire clatter of keys. Finally, he leaned back, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. "Found something." "You cracked it already?" Nylia asked, impressed despite herself. "Of course," he said with mock humility. "I'm the best, but you know that." The trick was finding the right frequency to decrypt their comm protocols. They've masked it well, but not well enough. "What did you find?" She leaned in, her eyes scanning the screen. "It's a communications log," Riven explained, buried under layers of bureaucratic drivel. "Orders for fleet mobilization, troop movements." Not exactly what you'd expect from a peace treaty. Nylia felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. "So it's true, they're planning an invasion." "Seems like it," Riven confirmed. "But here's the kicker, it's all signed off by someone on our side." "What?" "Yep. Someone high up in the Galactic Council is playing a very dangerous game. It's not just the Jaren. We've got traitors in our midst." Nylia processed this new wrinkle, a sense of betrayal burning in her gut. "Who?" Riven shrugged. "That's where it gets tricky. Whoever it is, they've covered their tracks well. The signature's encrypted, multi-layered. We'd need more than just my charming company to crack it." "Great," Nylia muttered. "So we have a Jaren invasion and a mole and no way to prove it." "Pretty much," Riven said, a touch too cheerfully. "Welcome to another day in paradise." Nylia rubbed her temples, feeling a headache brewing. "We need evidence, something solid we can take to the council." "Which is easier said than done," Riven remarked. "They've got more security on this data than a paranoid AI." "But you can do it, right?" Nylia pressed, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "With enough time, maybe," Riven replied with a lazy grin. "And by time, I mean enough for the Jaren to have their way with the colonies before we're ready." "Not helpful, Riven. Just being realistic. This isn't a sprint, Nylia. It's a marathon, and we're running out of time." She stood, feeling the weight of the universe on her shoulders. "Keep digging. I'll see what I can do on my end." "Always a pleasure working with you, Nylia," Riven called after her as she made her way to the door. "Try not to get disintegrated before dinner." "Noted," she replied dryly, stepping back into the grimy streets of Synapse. The neon glow of the city seemed dimmer somehow, the usual hustle and bustle feeling like background noise to the storm brewing in her mind. The Jaren were playing a dangerous game, and someone in the council was helping them. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any knife, a reminder that trust was as rare as a solar eclipse in a blackout. But she wouldn't let it end here, not if she had anything to say about it. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but Nylia had never been one to shy away from a fight, especially when the stakes were this high. She'd find a way to get the evidence they needed, even if it meant diving headfirst into the hornet's nest. Because in a universe where six-legged lizards were hell-bent on conquest, someone had to stand up and say enough was enough. And that someone just happened to be her. Lucky universe. Nylia left Riven's lair, the door shutting behind her with a sound that was more final than reassuring. It was the kind of noise that said, "Sorry, no refunds." She'd gotten what she came for, but now she had the delightful task of dealing with the fallout. The Jaren were gearing up for another round of "let's see how many human eyeballs we can collect," and someone high up in the Galactic Council was giving them a helping hand. Lovely. She made her way through the streets of Synapse, the neon lights flickering overhead like they were trying to tell her something. Probably the same thing as always. You're screwed. The air was filled with the familiar scent of fried food and desperation. Not exactly the bouquet of victory, but you worked with what you had. Nylia flipped open her holo display, scanning through the data Riven had extracted. Fleet movements here, encrypted messages there. It was the kind of information that made you wish you had a stiff drink and a stiff resolve in that order. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, though it was hard to tell in a city where paranoia was a survival trait. Her path took her to Jax, her laid-back assistant who had a talent for looking like he was working while doing absolutely nothing. He lounged against a railing, eyes half-lidded, the picture of indifference. "Nylia," he greeted, not bothering to stand up. "You look like you've been through a blender set to paranoia." "Thanks, Jax. Nice to know I'm as transparent as a Jaren peace treaty," she shot back. "Got a minute? For you, boss, always, but don't expect any heavy lifting." Nylia handed him the holo display, watching as he shifted gears from lazy to only slightly less lazy. "We've got a problem," Jaren sized. "And it's growing." Jack scanned the data, a low whistle escaping his lips. "Well, ain't that a kick in the jetpack? They're not supposed to be doing any of this, right? You know, what with the whole let's not murder each other for a change thing." "Exactly. Which means someone on our side is playing both ends against the middle. We need to figure out who, and fast. And by we you mean me, right? See, you're already getting it." "I knew I hired you for a reason." Jax laughed, a sound that was more exasperated than amused. He handed the display back. "All right, I'll do some digging. Just don't expect miracles or punctuality." Nylia nodded, appreciating his candor. "I'll take what I can get. Just keep it discreet, yeah. Last thing we need is someone taking us out before we even know who's screwing us over." With a mock salute, Jax slouched off, leaving Nylia to her thoughts. She needed more information, more allies, more something. Anything that would give her a fighting chance against the odds stacking up like bad debts. The tension in Synapse was almost palpable, the kind of vibe you get when everyone's waiting for the other shoe to drop. Rumors about the treaty's authenticity had started circulating, whispered conversations in dark corners and back alleys. People were edgy, uncertain, and rightly so. Trust was a commodity that was rapidly inflating in value, and everyone was out of stock. Nylia made her way to one of the city's many underground hubs, a place where information flowed like cheap liquor and was about as reliable. The entrance was tucked away in the basement of a rundown cantina, accessible only if you knew the right people or had the right amount of credits. She had both for now. The place was crowded, filled with the usual suspects, traders, techies, and the occasional mercenary looking to offload some authentic Earth relics that were about as authentic as a politician's promise. Nylia found a spot at the bar, ordering a drink that smelled like rubbing alcohol but promised oblivion. She needed to clear her head, or at least fog it up just enough to piece things together without the added burden of existential dread. As she nursed her drink, she listened to the conversations around her, filtering through the noise for anything useful. Most of it was the usual drivel: who was sleeping with who was cheating who was planning the next big heist. But every now and then, a word or phrase would catch her attention, something about the treaty, about the Jaren. "You hear they're moving troops," a voice said nearby, low and conspiratorial. "Yeah, but it's all hush-hush. Can't believe they're still sticking to this peace nonsense," another voice replied. Nylia turned slightly, catching the eye of the first speaker, a woman with a face as hard as a Jaren's hide. "You know something about the treaty?" Nylia asked, feigning casual interest. The woman eyed her warily, sizing her up. "Depends, you buying or selling. Neither, just curious. Curiosity killed the cat, you know, so they say. But I've got 9 lives, give or take." The woman chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Well, what's left of the treaty's a joke. Everyone knows it, but no one's saying it out loud. Not unless they fancy getting disappeared." "Disappeared, huh? Sounds like a party I wouldn't want to be invited to." "Exactly. So if you're smart, you'll steer clear." Nylia nodded, though the woman's words only confirmed her fears. The peace treaty was a sham, a flimsy facade barely holding back the chaos underneath. And if people were starting to notice, it was only a matter of time before the whole thing blew up spectacularly. She finished her drink, the burn of the alcohol a familiar, if not entirely welcome, sensation. There was work to be done, and she couldn't afford to sit around drowning in cheap booze and cheaper talk. She needed to find Riven and see if he'd made any progress, or at least hadn't gotten himself killed in the process. Outside, the city of Synapse buzzed with a frenetic energy, the kind that suggested something big was about to happen. Nylia could feel it in her bones, a sense of urgency that wasn't entirely her own. The Jaren were coming, and the humans were too busy tripping over their own feet to see it. As she headed back toward Riven's lair, her communicator buzzed insistently. She glanced at the screen, recognizing the code as one of Riven's typically cryptic messages. It read simply, "Found something. You'll want to see this." With a sigh that was equal parts relief and trepidation, Nylia changed course, her footsteps quickening. Whatever Riven had found, she had a feeling it was going to be the key to either solving their problems or making them infinitely worse. The entrance to Riven's lair was as unassuming as always, the door opening with a reluctant creak. Inside, the place was as chaotic as ever, a testament to Riven's unique brand of organized madness. He was hunched over his console, eyes glued to the screen, fingers dancing across keys with a speed that suggested a caffeine overdose. "Nylia," he greeted, not bothering to look up. "You're just in time for the grand unraveling." She approached, curiosity piqued. "What did you find?" "You know, the usual. Lies, betrayals, the odd assassination order. You'd be amazed what you can dig up if you know where to look." Nylia folded her arms, leaning against the wall. "Care to elaborate?" Riven finally glanced her way, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Our dear friends in the council aren't just turning a blind eye to the Jaren's plans. They're actively helping them. Funding, resources, all the things you'd need to start a nice little war." "Why?" Nylia asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew the answer. "Power, control, the usual suspects. If the Jaren win, they've got a seat at the table. If not, well, they've covered their tracks well enough to disappear into the woodwork. So we're dealing with a full-blown conspiracy. Pretty much. And the best part, they've set up a nice little surveillance system throughout the city. Anyone who gets too close to the truth gets a one-way ticket to nowhere." Nylia felt her stomach twist. "Is that what happened to the others, the ones asking questions?" "Most likely. Which means we're on borrowed time, my friend." "Great," she muttered. "Because I was just thinking my life was feeling a bit too predictable." Riven gestured to his screen, lines of code streaming past like an indecipherable river. "I've got a lead on who's behind this mess. It'll take time to crack, but it's a start. Can you do it?" "Eventually. But we'll need to move fast. Once they know we're onto them, things are gonna get." "Interesting." Nylia nodded, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders like an unwelcome guest. "Then let's get to work. We've got a conspiracy to unravel and a city to save." "Always up for a challenge, aren't you, Nylia?" She smirked, a hint of determination in her eyes. "What can I say?" I like to keep things interesting. With renewed purpose, they dove into the task at hand, the hum of technology and the distant rumble of the city a constant backdrop to their efforts. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but Nylia had never been one to back down from a fight, especially not when the universe was hanging in the balance. As they worked, the city around them continued its relentless march toward chaos, oblivious to the storm brewing just out of sight. But Nylia was ready to face whatever came next with grit, determination, and a healthy dose of irreverence. Because in a world where six-legged lizards were plotting your demise, the least you could do was face it all with a smile and a sarcastic quip. And maybe, just maybe, come out on the other side with both eyeballs intact. The lair's ambient hum was replaced by something more sinister, a barely perceptible whine like a mosquito with a vendetta. Riven picked up on it first, freezing mid-keystroke. "You hear that?" Nylia stopped typing, her senses sharpening. "Hear what?" "The sound of our impending doom." Riven rolled his eyes, which was an impressive feat given his attention was still glued to the screen. "No, smartass. The network's being tampered with. Someone's poking around where they shouldn't be." "Great. Just what we needed. A nosy neighbor with 6 legs." An alarm pinged on Riven's console and his fingers started dancing faster than a caffeine-fueled squirt. "Crap. They're isolating us." Nylia's stomach dropped. "Jarens, unless we've got another bunch of lizard psychopaths after us, which, let's be honest, wouldn't exactly be shocking." The room's dim lighting flickered ominously, shadows leaping across the walls like they were rehearsing for a horror flick. Nylia glanced at the door, then back at Riven. "Time to boogie." Riven gave a tense nod, yanking a thumb drive from his console. "Got it all backed up, I think." "You think?" "Hey, at least I didn't say hope." They moved quickly, gathering essentials with the efficiency of people who'd done this before, because they had. When your line of work involved pissing off extraterrestrial warlords, packing light was a survival skill. The exit wasn't far, but it felt like miles as Riven cursed under his breath, muttering about firewalls and digital landmines. Nylia kept an eye on their surroundings, the hairs on her neck standing at attention. They'd triggered something, and she had the distinct feeling that something was now staring back. "Quick detour," Riven suggested, jerking his head towards a side corridor. "You really know how to sweet-talk a girl," Nylia grumbled, following him through a narrow passage that smelled like desperation and cheap air freshener. The lair's usual clutter was conspicuously absent here, replaced by the starkness of metal walls that seemed to close in with each step. Nylia's mind raced, calculating odds, evaluating risks. She'd never been one for blind optimism. Realism was her flawed but loyal companion. "Got a plan?" she asked, more out of habit than hope. "Keep running till we're not dead, solid." "Maybe you should write a book." They emerged into a larger room, one with a vent that looked just wide enough to squeeze through if they skipped dessert. Riven looked up, grimacing. "Well, it's either that or getting caught. Death by claustrophobia it is," she replied, giving him a boost. The vent was a tight fit, not exactly designed for human travel unless you were a child or a contortionist. Nylia wriggled through, her elbows scraping against the sides as she followed Riven. "I swear if I get stuck, I'm haunting you," she muttered. "Join the club," Riven shot back, his voice echoing ahead of her. As they crawled, the air became heavier, more oppressive, like the universe itself wanted to make things difficult. Nylia focused on moving forward, on not thinking about the Jarens possibly watching them with disdainful eyes. Minutes felt like hours, but finally they dropped into an alleyway, the harsh lights of synapse flickering overhead. Nylia inhaled deeply, the polluted air a welcome relief after the confines of the vent. "Freedom," Riven said, stretching his arms until something audibly popped. "Well, sort of. Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Nylia cautioned. "We're not out of the frying pan yet." Right. The whole impending doom thing. Their next stop was the underground network, a web of human resistance as tangled as the mess they were in. Nylia knew a guy, a contact she'd cultivated with the care usually reserved for rare plants and much-needed sarcasm. Jax was unsurprisingly waiting for them at the entrance. He gave them a once-over that spoke volumes. "You two look like hell, thanks, darling. We aim to please," Nylia replied, dusting herself off. "What's the sitrep?" Jax asked, looking less lazy now and more like someone who knew the stakes had just been raised. "Jarans are playing games with our network. We need a place to regroup, maybe a little firepower," Riven explained, absent-mindedly swinging the thumb drive from his fingers. "Firepower, huh? Planning to start a war," Nylia shrugged. "Only if they start one first." Jax led them through a maze of tunnels, each turn bringing them closer to the pulse of the resistance. It was a living, breathing organism made up of disillusioned citizens and forgotten soldiers. People who knew better than to trust in peace treaties written in ink as thin as water. "Here we are," Jax announced, stopping in front of a reinforced door. "Home sweet home, if you're into grunge aesthetics." The door swung open to reveal a room that could have been a command center if command centers were cobbled together from spare parts and hope. Screens lined the walls, each displaying data streams, maps, and the occasional vintage meme. It was both chaotic and comforting, like Christmas with a dysfunctional family. "Welcome to the bunker," Jax said, spreading his arms wide as if presenting a grand palace. "Charming," Riven commented, already making a beeline for the nearest console. Nylia scanned the room, taking in the faces of those around her, some familiar, others new. They all shared a common purpose, a determination that was both inspiring and slightly terrifying. "What's the plan?" Nylia asked, focusing on the task at hand. "First, we figure out what the Jarans are really up to," Riven replied, his fingers already back at work. "Then we stop them. Or die trying. Preferably not the dying part," Jax added, leaning against a table piled high with equipment that looked both experimental and explosive. "Agreed. I'm kind of attached to my non-dead status," Nylia quipped, eyeing a particularly unstable-looking device. The room buzzed with activity as people moved about, each playing their part in the larger scheme of things. There was an energy here, a sense of belonging that was hard to come by in a universe that seemed determined to chew you up and spit you out. Nylia found herself caught up in it, her cynicism momentarily overshadowed by the possibility that they might just pull this off. That maybe, just maybe, they could outmaneuver the Jarans and the traitors in their own ranks. "All right, folks," Riven announced, drawing attention with the confidence of someone who thrived under pressure. "We've got a lot to do and not much time to do it. Let's make some magic happen." Nylia grinned, her spirits lifted by the challenge. "Let's show these lizard bastards what humans are made of, mostly water and bad decisions." Jax suggested, ever the realist. "Exactly," Nylia replied, her tone dripping with irony. "But sometimes, that's all you need." The hours passed in a blur of information and planning, the bunker becoming a hive of activity as ideas were thrown around and discarded as quickly as they appeared. They were up against the wall, but Nylia had always believed that desperation bred ingenuity. Riven worked his magic with the computers, his focus unwavering as he navigated the labyrinth of data that was their lifeline. Jax coordinated efforts, his laid-back demeanor replaced by the sharpness of someone used to thinking 3 moves ahead. Nylia played her part, pulling together the disparate threads of their plan and weaving them into something resembling a coherent strategy. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was a start. "Got something," Riven announced at last, his voice cutting through the clamor like a knife. "A weak spot in their network. It's risky, but if we hit it right, we can knock them off balance." "Define risky," Nylia said, already knowing the answer wouldn't be reassuring. "Involves getting up close and personal with their main base," Riven replied, his face lit by the glow of the screens. "But it's our best shot." "Great. Because I was just thinking today was lacking in lethal excitement," Nylia said, her sarcasm a thin veneer over the very real anxiety coiling in her gut. Jax gave her a lopsided grin. "I'll get the gear." As the plan solidified, Nylia found herself caught in the momentum of their efforts, her doubts pushed aside by the adrenaline of action. They had a chance, A slim, absurdly dangerous chance, but it was theirs. "Ready?" Riven asked, joining her by the entrance as they prepared to set out. "Not even close," she replied, a smirk on her lips. "But when has that ever stopped us?" "Never," Riven said, his expression mirroring hers. Jax met them at the door, a bag slung over his shoulder, its contents rattling ominously. "Got everything we need to raise some hell. Then let's make it a night to remember," Nylia said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. With a final nod to the room, they stepped out into the unknown, a trio of unlikely heroes against an enemy that seemed insurmountable. But as far as Nylia was concerned, the odds had never mattered. What counted was the fight, the refusal to back down even when the universe seemed determined to push you into the dirt. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about standing your ground, about proving that even the most mismatched of teams could make a difference. And that, Nylia thought, was worth every risk. The skyline of Synapse flickered like a faulty neon sign, which was fitting because, in many ways, that's exactly what the city had become. A poorly functioning beacon of hope in a universe that didn't give a damn. Nylia glanced out from the bunker's entrance, her eyes scanning the chaos below with a mix of disbelief and resignation. The Jarans had outdone themselves this time, launching a disinformation campaign so thorough it might as well have been a masterclass on how to destabilize humanity 101. "Looks like the Jarans have been busy," Jax commented, joining her. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, looking like he just stepped out of a dystopian fashion catalog. "I mean, who knew they had a flair for theatrics? All this time I thought they just liked collecting eyeballs," Nylia sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down like a lead blanket. "Yeah, well, apparently they've discovered the joys of propaganda, and they're damn good at it." The city was a mess. Everywhere you looked, screens broadcast conflicting messages. "Jaran Peace Treaty. Our Salvation Council confirms. Jarans are allies." The kind of headlines that made you want to gouge your own eyes out, which was ironic considering the Jarans seemed keen on doing that for everyone. "People are losing it," Jax said, nodding towards a group of civilians arguing on a street corner. "And I mean more than usual. That guy over there is debating the merits of eyelid removal. Yeah, well, it's not every day you find out you might become a six-legged lizard snack," Nylia said, trying to keep her tone light despite the growing dread in her chest. Inside the bunker, things weren't much better. The usual hum of activity had taken on a frantic edge, the resistance scrambling to keep up with the Jarans' disinformation blitz. Resources were dwindling, morale was plummeting, and the air was thick with a tension that you could cut with a rusty butter knife. Riven was glued to his console, his eyes darting across the screen as if he could will the data to present a solution. "We're getting our collective asses handed to us," he muttered, his fingers tapping out a rhythm of frustration. "They've got us chasing our own tails." "Yeah, well, at least we're consistent," Nylia replied, planting herself beside him. "What's the latest?" "Their network's a fortress," Riven said, not looking up. "And our attempts to breach it are like trying to tickle a brick wall." "Delightful," she said, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "And here I thought today was going to be boring." Riven glanced sideways, a smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth. "Boredom's for people who are winning, Nylia. We're just trying to survive." "Right. Silly me." As she surveyed the room, Nylia couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a losing battle. The Jarans were playing 3D chess while they were stuck with checkers, and the board was looking pretty damn empty. Jax plopped down in a chair opposite them, his usual laid-back demeanor strained by the pressure. "Any bright ideas, or are we just going to wait for the lizards to send us an eviction notice?" Nylia sat back, rubbing her temples. "I'm fresh out of miracles, but if you've got one in your back pocket, now's the time." "Nothing but lint and poor life choices," Jax replied, fiddling with a stray cable. They'd been here before, countless times up against the wall with nothing but desperation and a few bad jokes to keep them company. But this time felt different, heavier, as if the universe had decided to turn the screws just a bit tighter. "Look," Riven said, breaking the silence. "We've got one shot at this, and it's not great. But if we can take out their main transmitter, we'll cut off their ability to keep spreading this garbage. And how do we do that without ending up as pet food?" Nylia asked. "With a lot of luck and a little bit of quiet," Riven said, finally looking her way. "We'll need to sneak past their defenses, plan a little digital surprise, and hope to hell they don't notice until it's too late." "Oh, is that all?" Jax said with a sardonic grin. "I was worried it might be difficult." Nylia nodded slowly, her mind already working through the logistics. "And if we fail, then we're screwed," Riven said simply. "But I think we're already halfway there, so what's a little more? Great." "Let's call this plan F for fingers crossed," Nylia said, pushing to her feet. "Get the gear. We need to move before things get any worse." Jax and Riven exchanged a look, the kind that said they were both very aware of how slim the odds were but had decided to go along for the ride anyway. The streets of Synapse had taken on a carnival atmosphere, if the carnival were run by a deranged madman with a penchant for chaos. People were shouting, arguing, even fighting, their anger fueled by the Jarans' expertly crafted misinformation. The air was thick with distrust and confusion, the kind of environment in which rash decisions were made and regret was a constant companion. Nylia led the way, weaving through the crowds with the ease of someone who'd spent far too long navigating the mess of human emotion and conflict. Her focus was unwavering, her determination a beacon that she clung to because, frankly, it was better than the alternative. "How are we doing?" Jax asked, his voice low as they ducked into an alleyway. "About as well as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs," Nylia replied, glancing back at him. "But we'll manage." Riven was hunched over the portable console he'd rigged up, his expression one of intense concentration. "Just keep us moving. I'll let you know when we're close." The path they took was circuitous, a maze of back alleys and hidden passages that seemed to twist in on themselves. Nylia's sense of direction was the only thing keeping them from becoming hopelessly lost, a skill honed by years of dodging trouble in a city that seemed to breed it like a particularly stubborn fungus. They approached the Jarans' main transmitter, a monstrosity of metal and circuitry that loomed over the city like some kind of alien overlord. It was heavily guarded, of course. The kind of place that screamed "do not enter" with every fiber of its being. "All right, we're here," Nylia said, pulling them to a stop just out of sight. "What's the plan?" Riven's eyes sparkled with the kind of manic energy that only came from being neck-deep in potential catastrophe. "We need to get inside, plant the virus, and get out without being noticed." "Simple, then," Jax said with a grin that was more grimace. "And here I was worried it might be complicated." "Let's move," Nylia said, taking point as they crept towards the entrance. The guards were alert, their reptilian eyes scanning the darkness with a vigilance that spoke of experience. They were ready for anything, which was exactly why they weren't ready for Nylia and her team. Because really, who would expect a ragtag group of humans to waltz up to their front door and knock? Moving with the kind of precision reserved for surgeons and pickpockets, they slipped past the defenses, adrenaline and sheer audacity propelling them forward. Inside, the transmitter was a labyrinth of wires and humming machinery, the air buzzing with the thrum of a system that held the city in its grip. Riven went to work, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing even if nobody else did. The virus was a piece of digital art, a creation designed to weave its way through the Jarran systems, unraveling their lies and leaving them exposed. "Got it," Riven said, straightening up with a look of triumph. "Now let's get the hell out of here." They retraced their steps, the tension ratcheting up with each passing second. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every corner a potential ambush. But they moved quickly, quietly, the weight of their mission pushing them onward. Back out in the streets, Nylia allowed herself a moment to breathe, the enormity of what they'd done settling over her like a second skin. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was something. A crack in the Jharon's armor, a chance to turn the tide. Think it'll work? Jax asked, falling into step beside her. It better, Nylia replied, her tone edged with the kind of defiance that had carried her through countless battles. Because if it doesn't, I'm out of ideas. Riven joined them, his expression a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. We did it. Now we just have to wait and see if it sticks. Well, I've always been bad at waiting, Nylia said, her eyes scanning the horizon. But maybe this time we'll catch a break. The city continued to writhe in turmoil, but there was a shift, a subtle change in the air that spoke of hope. It was tenuous, fragile, but it was there. As they made their way back to the bunker, Nylia couldn't help but feel a swell of pride in their ragtag group. They'd done the impossible, or at least attempted it, and sometimes that was enough. Because in a universe that seemed determined to knock them down, standing up was a victory in itself. And while the Jharons might have had the upper hand for now, Nylia knew that the scales could tip in an instant. Here's to another day, Jax said as they reached the bunker, holding up an imaginary glass in a toast to their survival. Another day, Nylia agreed, allowing herself a rare smile. And maybe a better tomorrow. And as they stepped back into the fray, the city of Synapse continued to pulse around them, a living testament to the resilience of humanity in the face of overwhelming odds. The bunker was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that stretched out and swallowed you whole. It was the calm before the storm, or maybe just the calm before the next shitshow. Doctor. Nylia Curran stood hunched over her holo display, the ghostly blue light painting her face in sharp relief. She tapped a sequence, her fingers moving with the practiced ease of someone too familiar with bad news. Well, here's a piece of history I don't remember anyone mentioning in Galactic History 101, she muttered, eyes scanning the data scrolling across the display. Time travel. Because playing God always ends well. Jax, who just sauntered in with the air of someone expecting the worst and hoping for nothing, arched a dubious eyebrow. Time travel, huh? You sure you haven't been sipping the Jharon's Kool-Aid? Believe me, I wish. But this little gem's been buried in the city's core for who knows how long. A relic from the days when humanity thought tinkering with the space-time continuum was a better hobby than knitting. Riven, emerging from the shadows where he'd been communing with his console, glanced over with mild curiosity. Are we talking about a real-time machine or one of those imagine yourself on a beach kind of things? Real enough to screw us over if we're not careful, Nylia replied. She flicked a few more settings, bringing up a schematic that looked more like a circuit board designed by a madman. It's not complete, but the components are there. Might be just crazy enough to work. And what's the plan, Captain? Jax asked, folding his arms. Spin the dial and hope we land on a day when the Jharons weren't feeling particularly peckish, something like that, Nylia said, not missing a beat. But more specifically, we're going to gather some dirt on the Jharons that might actually stick. High-stakes archaeology, Riven mused. Always wanted to try that. The truth was, the time-travel device was a Hail Mary, a last-ditch effort when every other ditch had been thoroughly exhausted. It was hidden deep in the bowels of Synapse, beneath layers of bureaucracy and forgotten infrastructure. The kind of place you went if you wanted to come out with a few more stories and a few less limbs. If we can find the evidence we need, we can blow this whole thing open, Nylia continued, her tone steady despite the madness of the plan. We prove the Jharons have been manipulating time to stack the deck. We get the council on our side, or at least off our backs, and how likely is that on a scale of 1 to you've got to be kidding? Jax inquired, his smile part grin, part grimace. About a 6, Nylia admitted. But I've always been an optimist. Great. Nothing like betting on the long shot, Riven said, his voice layered with sarcasm. But hey, at least we're used to disappointment. They set out. The path to the city's core a tangled mess of corridors that seemed designed to keep secrets rather than reveal them. As they moved, Nylia kept one eye on the map flickering on her handheld, the other on the shadows that clung to every corner. "So what do you think the odds are that this thing will actually work without frying us?" Jax asked, his tone light but his expression serious. "Well, considering the age of the tech and the fact that it's never been tested, let's call it an exciting gamble," Nylia replied, not slowing her pace. "Exciting is one word for it," Riven added. "Suicidal is another." They reached the core, a cavernous space filled with rusting machinery and the stale scent of forgotten ambition. The time device stood at the center, a hulking monument to human hubris and ingenuity. It looked like someone had taken the guts of a spaceship and half a dozen washing machines, then decided they'd make a fine sculpture. "Okay, folks," Nylia said, marching up to the control panel. "Let's see if we can't make history by rewriting it." Riven cracked his knuckles, stepping up beside her. "What's our target date?" Just before the Jarans made their first big move, Nylia replied. "We need proof they've been meddling." "Proof?" Jax asked, cocking his head. "I thought we were looking for a miracle." "Well," Nylia said with a wry grin, "if miracles were easy, everyone would have one." They worked quickly, the hum of the device building around them, an electric promise of potential and catastrophe. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting to terminals that hadn't seen life in decades. "Ready?" Riven asked, his hand hovering over the activation switch. "Ready as we'll ever be," Nylia said, her heart pounding in her chest. The device roared to life, lights flaring, the air crackling with energy. It was the kind of spectacle that either ended in a headline or a eulogy. The room twisted, reality bending around them, the world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of color and sound. When the chaos settled, they found themselves standing amidst the past, a world both familiar and alien. The city of Synapse, vibrant and unscarred, stretched out before them. "Well, that was different," Jax said, blinking against the sudden clarity of it all. "Welcome to yesterday," Riven muttered, surveying their surroundings. Nylia took a deep breath, steadying herself. "All right, let's find our evidence and get the hell out before we start rewriting our own histories." They moved through the streets, a silent presence amid the oblivious crowds. It was a strange sensation, walking among people who had no idea the future was teetering on the brink of oblivion. The kind of surreal experience that made Nylia wonder if she should have been in therapy instead of a rebellion. "What are we looking for exactly?" Jax asked, keeping his voice low. "Anything that points to the Jarans' involvement. Records, communications, something tangible," Nylia replied, eyes scanning the crowd. "And then what?" Riven asked. "We just waltz back and hope the council believes us. That's the plan," Nylia said, though the skepticism in her voice was hard to miss. They made their way to a government building, one of the few structures that had remained consistent across time. Inside, it smelled of paper and bureaucracy, a familiar scent that spoke of both tedium and security. "Why do these places always feel like a dentist's office?" Jax muttered, his expression one of reluctant nostalgia. "Because both are designed to make you suffer," Riven replied, rifling through a filing cabinet with all the grace of a ferret on caffeine. The search was painstaking, each file a potential needle in a deceptively small haystack. But after what felt like hours, Nylia found what they needed. A series of communications, encrypted and hidden within the mundane drivel of daily operations. "Got it," she said, holding up a stack of papers as if they were the Holy Grail, evidence of temporal interference. "Enough to give the council a headache at least." "Great," Jax said, a lopsided grin on his face. "Now let's get out of here before someone decides we're overdue for a time travel fine." They retraced their steps, the city's past slipping by in a blur of faces and memories. The return to the present was just as chaotic as their departure, the time device spitting them out with all the grace of a malfunctioning toaster. "Well, we're not dead," Riven said, brushing off the experience like dust off a jacket. "Or we are, and this is some ironic afterlife," Jax added, looking around the familiar confines of the bunker. Nylia clutched the papers to her chest, her expression one of both relief and grim determination. "We've got what we need. Now we just have to convince the people in power that they care. Easier said than done, Riven pointed out, his tone dry as a Martian summer. True, Nylia admitted, but we've done the impossible once today. Let's see if we can't make it a double. As they regrouped, the weight of their discovery settled over them like a heavy cloak. The evidence was solid, the proof undeniable, but in a world where truth was as malleable as time itself, convincing others would be the real challenge. Well, here's to making history, Jack said, raising an imaginary glass again, though this time the sentiment felt less like a joke and more like a vow. To history, Nylia echoed, a smile tugging at her lips despite the odds stacked against them. And as they prepared to face the storm that lay ahead, the city of Synapse continued to pulse around them, a testament not to resilience, but to the sheer, stubborn defiance of the human spirit. Well, if this doesn't get us both a medal or a life sentence, I'll be disappointed, Riven said, fingers flying over the console like a pianist in a death metal band. Nylia was already busy encrypting the files they had retrieved. Just remember, the Council doesn't award medals for good intentions, only for outcomes they can brag about. Jax leaned against the bunker's wall, arms crossed, wearing the expression of a man both skeptical and intrigued. You really think this pile of paper is enough to make the Council give a damn? Nylia sighed. If it doesn't, we'll at least have the pleasure of knowing we tried. And I don't know about you, but I find a certain comfort in tilting at windmills. Windmills? Jax asked, an eyebrow climbing into the stratosphere. I'm not sure those even exist anymore. Exactly, Riven chimed in, a smirk on his face. That's why it's a great metaphor. Look, Nylia said, the seriousness in her voice cutting through their banter. This is our best shot. The Jarans have been one step ahead because they've been pulling strings through time. We just need to cut those strings. Oh, is that all? Jax asked, sarcasm dripping like oil from a rusty engine. Simple as hacking the universe, then. Yeah, well, someone's got to do it, Riven said. And unfortunately, we're the idiots who volunteered. They finished prepping their data, each file locked down tighter than a miser's wallet. With everything ready, they moved out of the bunker, back into the flickering neon nightmare that was Synapse. The city offered all the comfort of a wet blanket in a blizzard. As they walked, Riven rubbed his hands together, a mischievous glint in his eye. You know, I never thought I'd be part of a time-traveling resistance. Not exactly what Career Day promised back in school. Didn't they promise we'd all be astronauts or something? Jack said, sidestepping a puddle that looked like it was plotting to ruin his day. Instead, we got this, policing cosmic lizards with a penchant for eyeballs. Life's full of surprises, Nylia quipped. Like discovering that your worst enemy has a time machine and really questionable dietary habits. The trio reached their destination, the Resistance HQ, a place that looked like it had been decorated by someone with a grudge against interior design. The walls were lined with old tech and mismatched furniture that screamed practicality over aesthetics. As they entered, the room buzzed with a low hum of activity. People were glued to screens, analyzing data and prepping for the next move. It was the kind of chaos that made Nylia feel right at home. Ah, the dream team arrives, a voice called out, sarcasm wrapped in genuine relief. It was Captain Bree, a woman who had the presence of a drill sergeant and the patience of a saint. Nylia handed over the files. We've got the goods, Captain. And by goods, I mean evidence that could make or break us. Bree took the files, her expression shifting from weary to hopeful. If this is what you say it is, it might just give us the edge we need to kick these scaly bastards back to wherever they crawled from. You forgot to mention the part where we also save the universe, Riven added. Details, Bree shot back, flipping through the pages. I'll get the analysts on this right away. If there's even a shred of truth, we'll make sure the Council sees it, Jack snorted. Getting the Council to see anything is like teaching a cat to swim. They prefer to ignore the water and pretend it doesn't exist. Well, we'll just have to make the water unavoidable, Nylia said. What's our next move? Leverage the network, Bree replied, not missing a beat. We'll need to control the narrative, flood the systems with our data before the Jarans can counter it. Ah, the old drown them in information tactic, Riven said with a grin. A classic. Exactly, Bree agreed. Now go. We'll coordinate from here. And remember, you're not just fighting for yourselves. You're fighting for every human in the galaxy. No pressure then, Jax replied, though the sarcasm was more of a comfort than a deflection. They left the HQ, minds buzzing with the task ahead. The network was a sprawling, tangled web of information, and they'd have to navigate it with the precision of a spider on a sugar high. Back in Riven's lair, the ambient hum of machinery was a soothing reminder of what still worked. Riven booted up the main console, the screen flooding with lines of code. "All right, time to play the Jaran at their own game," Riven said, slipping into his zone. "Nylia, you're on comms. Jax, keep an eye on the security feeds. If any Jaran ship so much as sneeze in our direction, I want to know." "Aye, aye, Captain," Jax replied, already tapping into the feeds. Nylia adjusted her headset, a sense of déjà vu settling in. "You know, if this works, we might just have to get real jobs. Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Riven said. "Save the universe first, bake cookies second." The plan was simple in theory, complicated in execution. Flood the network with their data, spread the truth about the Jaran machinations, and rally the resistance to strike back. As Riven began uploading their files, the tension in the room was palpable. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure wasn't just an option, it was a probability. But they weren't here for good odds, they were here for a fighting chance. "Data's live," Riven announced, eyes glued to the screen. "Jax, any movement, all clear for now," Jax replied, though his tone suggested that he didn't expect it to last. Nylia monitored the comms, the chatter a chaotic symphony of voices and data streams. "Resistance is mobilizing," she reported. "They're ready to hit back as soon as we give the word." "Let's not keep them waiting then," Riven said, fingers dancing across the keys. "We'll hit the Jaran where it hurts, right in the narrative." The next few hours were a blur of activity, each minute stretching into an eternity. The network buzzed with their data, a digital tide crashing against the Jaran's disinformation walls. As the evidence spread, the scales began to tip. In darkened rooms across the galaxy, people were waking up to the truth, seeing through the Jaran's lies, and realizing they weren't as invincible as they'd seemed. "Here's hoping the Council is paying attention," Nylia said, though the worn edge of doubt lingered in her voice. "Even politicians can't ignore a tidal wave," Jax said, though his eyes remained fixed on the screens. "But I'm sure they'll try." As the hours dragged on, the reality of their situation loomed larger. The resistance was rallying, but the Jarans were far from defeated. The battle was just beginning, and victory was as slippery as a soap bar in zero gravity. "All right, the network's doing its job," Riven said, a note of triumph in his voice. "Now we just have to hope our fearless leaders decide to grow a spine, or a brain," Jax added. "Preferably both," Nylia said. "But if push comes to shove, we'll make do with what we've got." And what they had was each other, a ragtag group of rebels fighting against a force that seemed unstoppable. But as long as they had hope, as long as they had each other, they weren't going down without a fight. "Let's get ready for the next wave," Riven said, determination etched into every line of his face. "We've got a galaxy to save." And so they prepared, each bracing for the storm that lay ahead. In a universe where nothing was certain, they'd found something worth fighting for. And if the Jarans thought they could conquer humanity, they were about to learn just how stubborn a species could be. "Here's to making history," Nylia said, raising her imaginary glass one last time. "To history," Jax and Riven echoed, the words carrying a weight of both hope and defiance. And as they stood together, ready to face whatever came next, they knew one thing for sure: they weren't alone. And that in the end could make all the difference. With the Jaran invasion finally thwarted, Synapse was a city on the mend, or as close to mending as a flickering neon nightmare could get. It was like trying to fix a broken leg with duct tape and good intentions. Sure, it might hold for a while, but you wouldn't want to run a marathon. Doctor. Nylia Curran stood on a platform overlooking what used to be the central hub of human activity. Now, it was a bustling construction site, a symphony of hammers and welders trying to drown out the lingering echoes of chaos. The resistance had done the impossible. They'd thrown the lizard bastards off their game. The city was still flickering, but at least now it was flickering with purpose. "Ah, the sweet smell of progress," Jax said, stepping up beside her, his face a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "Or maybe that's just the smell of burning wires." "Probably both," Nylia replied, watching a group of engineers arguing over a blueprint like it was a map to the Holy Grail. She couldn't help but grin. Even in the face of annihilation, humans would argue over directions. "Hard to believe we pulled it off," Jax said, crossing his arms. "Saving the universe and all. Thought that was just something people did in bad holodramas. Yeah, I'm still half expecting a director to yell cut and tell us we're all fired," Nylia said, shaking her head. "But here we are, the human race, stubborn as ever. Stubbornness is our superpower," Jax replied with a lazy smile. That in a healthy disregard for the rules. He nudged her shoulder. "What's next, Doc? You planning on running for president or something, please?" Nylia scoffed, rolling her eyes. "I'm allergic to politics. Besides, I'd rather stick to science. Politics is like trying to herd cats while someone sets your pants on fire." "Good point," Jax conceded. "Besides, the galaxy might implode if you left the lab." As they watched the workers below, the familiar figures of Riven Farr and Captain Bree approached, their expressions a study in mismatched resolve and fatigue. Riven looked like he'd been awake for a week straight, which he probably had been, tapping away at his console like it was the only thing standing between humanity and oblivion. "Hey, if it isn't the heroes of the Ior," Bree called out, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. "Can't believe we actually did it." "Believe it," Riven said, rubbing the back of his neck. "We gave the Jarans a run for their money. And by money, I mean time-traveling eyeballs. Let's hope they stay gone," Bree said. "Not a fan of playing hide-and-seek with psychotic lizards. They won't be back anytime soon," Nylia assured her. "We've dismantled their time manipulations, and without those, they're just oversized geckos with a grudge. Still, best to keep an eye out," Jax added with a wink. "Before they collect it, lovely," Riven muttered, but a hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Now that we've got a bit of breathing room, what's next?" Bree asked, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting the Jarans to pop out from behind a cloud. "I assume we're not just going to sit around on our laurels." "Nope," Nylia said, a spark of determination in her eyes. "We've got plans." Riven echoed, one eyebrow arching skeptically. "The kind that involve margaritas and beach chairs, I hope." "Sorry to disappoint," Nylia said, "but we're going for something a bit more ambitious. We're laying the groundwork for a new era. Innovation, vigilance, and all that jazz. A new era." Bree repeated, her tone a curious mix of hope and skepticism. "Isn't that what every dictator says before launching a coup?" "Good thing we're not dictators," Jax said. "Just a bunch of overworked individuals who've had enough of playing defense. It's time we start thinking 3 steps ahead. And you've got ideas, I presume," Bree said, crossing her arms. "An idea or two," Nylia admitted, turning her gaze back to the cityscape. "We can't let our guard down. The Jarans might be licking their wounds, but who knows what they'll try next time." "Agreed," Riven said, his voice surprisingly serious. "We need to strengthen our defenses, maybe even consider expanding our tech beyond what we've currently got." "That sounds suspiciously like a lot of work," Jax said, feigning a grimace. "Hard work never killed anyone," Bree said, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Though it's come close. So where do we start?" Riven asked, the coder in him already hungry for the next challenge. "With what we know," Nylia said. "We've got the data from the Jarans. It's time we turn their own technology against them. Enhance our network, solidify our communication channels, and most importantly, keep the Council in check." "Ah, the Council," Jax said with mock reverence. "Because nothing screams efficiency like a group of politicians trying to agree on lunch. Exactly why we need to keep them in line, Bree said. If we're not careful, they'll start making decisions based on whoever offers the best bribe, or whoever throws the fanciest party, Riven added. Then let's make sure we're in the right positions, Nylia said. It's time we stopped reacting and started anticipating. As they stood there, bathed in the glow of a city finding its footing, there was a sense of camaraderie, a shared purpose. It wasn't the end of their journey, but a new beginning. One where humanity wasn't just surviving, but thriving. And as long as they had each other, as long as they could count on the stubborn, irreverent spirit that had seen them through the Jaren threat, they knew they stood a chance against whatever the universe threw their way. So, we're really doing this, Jax said, more to himself than anyone else. A new era, yeah, Nylia said, her voice carrying the weight of the truth. We're really doing this. Here's to history, Riven said, raising an imaginary glass again. To history they echoed the words a pledge and a promise. They stood together, the city before them a testament to human resilience and a reminder of the challenges still ahead. But they weren't alone, and as long as they had each other, they were ready to face whatever came next. Let's get to work, Nylia said, feeling the familiar pull of purpose. And with that, they turned back to the task at hand, ready to build a future where humanity could not only survive but thrive. Because if the Jarans thought they could conquer a species as stubborn and irreverent as humans, they were about to learn just how wrong they could be.